Hi everyone, my name is Leon Evans from Spring Harvest. I'm on the Spring Harvest Planning Group, and I'm really excited to be with you today, talking to Alexandra Drew, who I'll introduce in a moment to you properly. I want to think about and talk to you about the theme for 2025, which is called No Greater Story, Rediscovering Your Place in God's Epic Adventure. And the reason I know that so much is that I'm writing the theme book for it, so I'm immersing my whole life in it at the moment. But the whole idea is looking at the greater story of God. You know, when you think about the Bible, you think about God as a creator, and then you think about the fall and God as a redeemer, and then ultimately God as the perfecter, bringing around the new heavens and the new earth. And this is a dramatic story that God invites every single one of us into. You know, every one of us has a story. Every one of our stories is unique. We don't get the story we want, but all of our stories, when they're part of God's greater story, they find redemption, they find meaning and hope and purpose and identity. And that's so important. And threading through this theme for Spring Harvest 2025 is this idea that you are part and can be part of God's greater story, whatever age or stage of life you are at. And that also includes later life, which is why I'm so pleased to welcome Alexandra Drew, because she works for an amazing organization called Faith in Later Life. Alexandra, great to have you with us. Why don't you just share a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the organization and what you do?
Oh, thank you, Leon. I'd absolutely love to. So, I lead the UK Christian charity Faith in Later Life. You know, we are living in an aging population. Our churches are aging, and we feel that this is a wonderful opportunity to share God's love and to introduce people to the love of Jesus. And so, we want to help people to know Jesus for the first time. We want to help those Christians in churches who are in later life to keep on getting to know Jesus more deeply. And we want to help older people to respond to God's irrevocable call
Mm.
to keep on making disciples.
That sounds amazing. Now, when you say later life and older adults, what are you talking about there, Alexandra? Because I think there's probably some watchers or listeners that might, think, I wonder if you're talking about me or not. So, I mean, how do you guys define that, and how do you look at that whole thing?
It's a very broad group. So
Yeah.
we say later life begins at 65 with retirement, but we know that being 65 is not the same as 95. So we know being older, it's not some homogenous group, and so we treat people differently according to their particular time of life and how it is that God calls them in that time. So yeah, it's different for everybody. You know, some people are in later life at 55.
Yeah.
And yet we know 95-year-olds who are bungee jumping for charity. So it's a tricky to define one, but
Yeah.
the statistics show us that we can start to look at later life from 65 plus.
That's great. I just wonder how many people are already Googling bungee jumping at 95 now, whether they can get that in for charity. That sounds amazing. One of the things that I know from sort of in my experience as a church pastor is there is a sense in which, and I know you would feel this as well, that we often celebrate youth and children's work, rightly so. You know, we look at youth and children across our nation. We don't maybe celebrate the work with older adults in quite the same way. What's been your experience around the nation? Where are you seeing it really well, where we are celebrating it? And what are maybe some of your concerns as you look at the UK church?
Yeah, so what I see is that some churches are really taking this very seriously. They've noticed their aging demographic and the aging demographic of their communities. They have remembered what the Bible says, that God has no favorites, that He has loved us from before the foundations of the earth, and that He will love us with an everlasting love. We also know of churches where older people feel that. Although they might have been very active and very well used, if you like, in their earlier years, there comes a point where they're actually stood down.
Wow.
And rather than then being invited to consider what they might be able to do now at this stage in their lives, they are they are simply perhaps asked to pray.
Yeah.
And I'm not undermining prayer in any way. Obviously, we know that our older friends are the boiler house of prayer in many churches, and that's marvelous. But actually, there are a lot of older people who have a great deal of wisdom,
Yeah.
experience, and skills yet to share. It might look
Yeah.
different in later life, but God's still calling them.
Wow, that's so good. Because I was thinking, like, for every other big transition in our life, we often have a lot of preparation for it, don't we? We have, and I think in retirement, it's maybe one of the biggest transitions. And I know certainly pastorally, it's met so many people that we just don't help prepare people, for that transition. Do you, as an organization, is that something you speak into to try and help people to prepare for that big shift in their life?
Absolutely. So, retirement, as you say, is one of the big
Mm.
transitions, and how well we navigate that transition will make a difference to whether we flourish in later life or whether we plummet. And so, it's worth giving some thought to, not just in terms of how will we spend our days, what cruises shall we go on, or how will we be able to afford, to eat and heat,
Yeah.
but also, how will we nurture our spiritual well-being into later life? What might God be calling us to in this stage of our lives? Even people who are, say, moving into a care home, that God's call does not end at the threshold of the care home. We
Wow.
know of older people still giving away tracts, still sharing Jesus with carers and visitors and other residents, and in the way that they are, exuding the glory of Jesus with a
Wow.
wonderful message of God's love.
You must have some great stories around the nation of people in later life finding purpose, being used by God in mission. Do you have any stories to share with us just to inspire us?
I've got lots of stories. The question is always which ones to go with, but one of my favorite stories is of one of our church champions who at 83 was invited to lead the seniors ministry of her church, and she had in on her mind that actually this might be better done by a younger person. So
Wow.
she was being self-ageist herself in that, if you like. She felt that she might not be the best person, and so she prayed, Lord, if if you have somebody else, bring them forward, otherwise I'll do it. And,
Wow.
of course, it was her role, and God appointed her to it, and she's 85 now, still doing this wonderful ministry, sharing Jesus with older people in the community, in the church. She's got a team, mostly of older people, who are well encouraged by the way she leads them, and she would say now that, having finally said yes to that call, that it's given her a new purpose in life for this
Wow.
stage of life. And,
That's
it's
great.
been wonderful to see.
Wow, that's inspiring. That's so good. Uh, the theme that we're looking at in 2025 is going to kind of draw on Isaiah, the book of Isaiah. And I'm just thinking as you're speaking there about that moment when, as a young man, Isaiah had that vision of God, and God said, "Who will go?" And as a young man, he said, "Here am I, send me." But then I'm also thinking, actually, if you look all the way through the Bible, that experience isn't just reserved for young men and young women. When you approach later life, and that sense of that God could be calling you into something. What are some of the challenges and the barriers, Alexandra, that we maybe, people who are in later life, but also that the church has with almost inviting older adults into that call of God at a later stage of life?
Well, I think there's sort of three layers of this, if you like. So there are some challenges for people exploring faith for the first time in later life.
Mhm.
So when we're younger, we might have a few questions about the meaning of the Bible, of God, and what it means to be a Christian. But as time goes on, actually, those concerns and thoughts and perhaps misconceptions become very deeply rooted, and these convictions that we've owned for 40, 60 years about who God is, especially when they're wrong, can be a real obstacle. So I met somebody in a pub in Belfast, actually, and he was chatting with me, and he found out why I was there, which was to speak about later life. And I asked him, I said, how about you? What do you think of God? Are you part of a church? Do you have a faith? And he said, oh, no, 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 no. No, I wasn't brought up in the church, you see. And I thought to myself, what on earth has that got to do with the price of milk? And it just showed that he had grown up all the way
Yeah.
into I think he was early 70s by the time I was talking with him. And he had in his head that in order to be a child of God, you have to have been brought up in the church. How mad is that?
Yeah.
We want to help people know the truth that
Mm.
all are invited when it comes to working out your calling in later life. I think churches can be really helpful in helping people to explore, what might God be calling you to at this time of life. Some people feel that it's time for a rest. Actually, people flourish much better when they have a purpose.
That's so good because I think often we think about what we can't do any longer,
Yeah.
but from almost a deficit kind of mindset rather than actually what we can do. And I love that question about what would you like to do. I think for a lot of people in later life, when they get to retirement, it's like you said, they think they've got all this time, but actually there's going to be a lot of grandparenting, maybe there's going to be a lot of other things, expectations, and actually for them to discover what is God saying to them in that season of life is really helpful, isn't it? Really helpful.
Definitely. I think the other thing about discipleship is that sometimes people can think, well, I've done the Bible in a year 5 times. I used to go to Spring Harvest.
Yeah,
I've heard it all. I've watched all the DVDs.
yeah,
I've done all this, but you know, we will go on for the rest of our lives and through eternity, and we will never be done getting to know God.
yeah. No, that's so good. That's so good. What do individuals or churches that may be watching or listening to this, Alexandra, what do they do? How do they connect with you, and how would they take that journey on with you as an organization? Because I think a lot of people, when they listen to what you're saying, would have a real resonance in their heart, but maybe just not know what to do next. What would be like a next step that people could do?
So we encourage churches to connect with us. And the key person we would love to connect with is either the church leader or that person with a heart for older people. That person who leads the luncheon club, who
Yeah.
knows when all the older people's birthdays are, who's probably got the Sunday lift rota in their pocket. We'd love to connect with that person. So they can find us on our website at faithinlaterlife.org. They can, for free, sign up to be a church champion. They'll then get my monthly newsletter. We'll invite them onto some Zooms and different resources. We just want to cheer them on, pray for them, and just really resource them in any way that we can for the work they're doing.
In our church here, we during lockdown, an elderly gentleman in his 80s, early 80s, in our community, his wife died. He went to a support group with the NHS. One of our young women was helping to run that, and she started talking to him, started befriending him. So I was sharing her faith with him, really, and then introduced him to us online. He watched us online, no church background, did Alpha online, gave his life to Jesus. And when we opened up again after lockdown, he was the first person in the room. And I just, for me, it's one of those when, his baptism photograph, which is him and me and this lady who's got pink hair, who befriended him, this young woman, baptizing this older guy. And he's just like he's a hero to all of us, really. He's there every week. He's quite frail now, but he's found Jesus in later life, and I think that's amazing. That's amazing. And we all get to be a part of that.
Yeah, and we love hearing stories like that of faith in
Yeah.
later life. It's such a thing that's on our heart. How can we do that?
Yeah.
How can we reach people
Yeah.
in later life?
Yeah, that's so good. Alexander, this has been so inspiring. And we really want to, Spring Harvest, we love what the church is doing across the nation. We want to cheer you on in all that you're doing. And at Spring Harvest next year, 2025, kind of keynote speaker all the way from America is Rick Warren, who's in his 70s. And in one stage has retired from his day job, if you like, 40 years leading Saddleback Church. But he's not retiring from the kingdom of God, because I don't think there is such a thing. And he's going to be there at Skegness and at Minehead. And I think that's going to be inspiring, actually, because he'll inspire younger people, but he'll inspire some older people as well who may think, "Do you know what? I thought that this was it, but it's not. I can still be part of God's greatest story." What would you say, just in conclusion, to people who maybe are at that point where they're thinking, maybe I've done my time in terms of God's story? What would you say?
No. We are part of God's great story through every chapter of our lives. Before the foundations of the earth, we were in the story. When He knit us together in our mother's womb, we were in God's great story. When we were children, when we were teenagers, when we were young adults, in midlife, when we retired, later life, and all the way into eternity, we will be part of God's great story, and we are. And so I just encourage people to come along to find out, how is God calling them now? What is God saying to them right now? I love the idea that Rick Warren obviously he's just looked at his next chapter of life and thought, right, Lord, give me a vision for what's next. And actually, what would our later lives look like if we all asked that question?
That's
So,
great.
yes, we heartily encourage people. If you haven't been to Spring Harvest for a long time, come back. It'd
Yeah.
be really great to hear from Rick, and it would be great to fellowship together, to be resourced. We're going to have a little stand at Minehead, so come and say hello to me.
Great.
Love to do that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to what Rick's going to say.
Alexander, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed and been inspired as well by this conversation with you. And guys, can I just say, if you're watching or listening to this, if you haven't yet booked in for Spring Harvest 2025, Skegness or Minehead, really encourage you to do that. I'd also encourage you to go and look at Faith in Later Life on their website. Check it out, all that they're doing, really inspiring. So, Alexander, thank you so much. And God bless you for all that you and the organization are doing for the kingdom of God. God bless you.
Thank you, Leon. See you there.